Hey there, I'm Ryan and welcome to today's landscape tutorial. All of the tools and materials will be listed in the video description, and if you'd like help with the drawing process, I will have the traceable up over on Patreon, where you can also get access to the ebooks, bonus lessons, art critiques. There's a lot up there to help aid you in your creative and artistic endeavors, but with that, let's jump into today's tutorial and get creative together. We're going to begin here today by grabbing a 1-inch flat-headed brush and dipping the bottom third of it into a little bit of water, then proceeding to wipe off the excess. From there, we'll head to our palette and we'll begin in the sky. So I'll grab an abundance of our titanium white, a little bit of our Naples yellow, wiping off the excess, and we'll just get a really clean blend of the two so that we don't have portions that are a little bit more yellow or a little bit more white. We want it to just be very cohesive as a whole. Then, going to paint in between all of these trees and just get the bottom of my sky with a nice thick application of paint. Now we'll add a little bit of extra Naples yellow to the mix. Yet again, make sure that it's nice and consistent. And we'll apply that right above our last mixture. We'll also do a soft blend between it and our new application by tapping very softly with our brush and blending it down into that previous color. We'll also put this at the top, right and top left. Now, yet again, we'll change it with a hint of our cadmium red. We want an incredibly small amount because it's a much stronger pigment and we don't want this to become too saturated. So we'll just apply that right on top. And like I said, very saturated. So we'll desaturate it, all of it, by grabbing some extra titanium white, working that into our mixture. A little bit of extra Naples yellow, just because we don't want it to be a true pink. And we'll go over this pigment yet again. Could be a little bit more yellow. But you can see that we're really not going with the first pigment we mix. Taking our time, getting it right. Then, we do blend into that slightly more pink mixture. And from there, we grab our ultramarine blue. We'll mix up a bright gray variant of it, so we'll also grab a hint of Mars Black. Mars Black will be the strongest of the pigments, so we really want a minimal amount. We'll make sure that we don't have any blue streaks within it, and we'll apply that right on top and bring it up a little bit. Then, once we've established it, we'll come back down and blend into the pinkish orange. Bring the pinkish orange up, bring the bluish gray down, till we have a very subtle blend. Then, we can do a slightly darker, slightly more blue, gray, to apply on the very top. And we'll just make sure our layers are nice and thick. Now, as we always say on the channel, 2 layers is better than 1. So I'm just going to add in a little bit more of that pinkish yellow at the bottom. Yet again, blend it up, blend the bluish gray back down. I'm even going to do so with the bottom Naples yellow, that golden light that we'll have coming through here. And just do a soft blend. There we go. Now we're going to work on some of our distant snow here, and we'll do so by grabbing an abundance of our titanium white, hint of our ultramarine blue, and just a hint of our Mars black as well. From there we'll mix up what should be a bluish gray, something brighter than the top of our sky, but with a similar hue. Then we can add in just a hint of our red so that we have some warmth. Then we'll head to start applying it. I'm going to do so at essentially the top of the land that we can see. And then we'll do a blend down. We're using the larger flat-headed brush because it allows us to cut around these trees very quickly, very easily. It allows us to create this sharp line for the top, and because it can carry an abundance of paint. So, real all-star brush in what we're currently working on. See, we'll just get that in there. And we can even bring it more so into the midground. I don't want to tackle too much space because I don't want it to kind of get ahead of me. But I think this will be quite alright. There we go. It's a good amount to work on at once. Now, the areas that are farther away from the light, so over here on the right, and then as we get closer to us, we want that to be a little bit darker. So we're going to throw some Mars black into the mix as well as additional ultramarine blue. We're going to avoid the red because we don't want the shadows to have that much warmth. So we'll just mix that up. Start to apply that right through the bottom here. We can place it in the areas that also won't get light, so little lips. You can tell that this is an area that moves up and then like that, and therefore it isn't facing the light. It isn't getting that sun. Same with here, and right here as well. We can do a slight blend up. I'm applying very little pressure. That way we get a soft blend, not anything too streaky or too harsh. It'll work really well if this pigment is still wet, but if it's not, we can still do a wet and a dry blend by just making sure that our brush is damp. And then the wet pigment which we're applying will dissipate as we move out and create these softer blends, despite the fact that it's not actually blending with the initial pigment. Now, what's better than a single layer? That's right, it's two. So, we'll build up more of the initial pigment, and we can even try adding a little bit of Naples yellow for the real distance now, because that is going to have additional warmth from the sun. Just throw that in there. And as you can tell, it isn't really any brighter than what we have in the mid. So we're going to brighten up this pigment just a little bit as it is closer to that light, and we do want to express that. So yet again, I'm placing it on the top. I'm doing a soft blend down. This is a wet into dry. I'm also softening my harsher edges. And we can create smaller little mounds of snow within the shadows. Bring this down just a little bit, not to a great extent, but a little bit. There we are. Then we'll move into a less heavy yellow mix. So back to our blues and our reds. Like that. starting to look a little bit better. But we do need more of our darker hues in layers as well. So we'll go back in with that too. And then we can actually do a wet into wet blend, which is really nice. See that it goes from more of a purple down to a blue. Now, as we step back, we can see just how soft it's starting to look, which is great because the real contrast is going to come in when we start placing the trees and we start having the details in the water. So right now we're keeping it fairly soft. And I'm just re-rendering the darker pigment, the darker, more blue pigment that we used for the snow down here, and we can do a little test. Definitely need more of the blue hue to it. Do another little test, and that looks perfect. So, from there, we can start instigating the shadows in some of the snow that's a little bit closer to us. Remember, as we get closer, we move farther away from the light, we move farther away from the yellow and pink palettes. Get more of that great blue. And it's worth noting that we are working with an ultramarine blue, which is a warmer blue, and it just fits in really well when a lot of the other pigments in the painting are a little bit warmer. Instead, I am just splashing it up in the snow, creating some somewhat larger openings and changes, just so that it's cohesive with what we have down here. Then we'll go to a brighter variant. So I'm just adding more titanium white. I'm not going to add any pink or Naples yellow to this mix right now. We'll try to work around our shadowy pigments initially. Not doing a real blend into them at this point because I don't want to dilute all of the pigment that I'm applying. But that does mean we have to be somewhat quick with our applications because we want to get back and do all of the blends before it dries. So now let's do that. A little bit of a blend down. Nice and easy. A little bit of a blend up. Maybe connect it to our past application. This is really neat. This is a higher bit of snow. Bit of a ledge. Trying to keep my hand out of the way for you. Blend that little piece. Yet again, more highlight. Really giving this some added form. Doesn't all have to be really soft, and adding a little bit of contrast is going to help. Doing some real vertical line work as well here, just to show how steep this area of snow is. I think we'll make this snow a little bit brighter in general. That said, we do need a contrast between this snow and this snow. So I might grab a little bit of my yellow. Typically, we really have to worry about or not worry, but be very cognizant and aware of working with yellows and blues together. But the beauty of Naples yellow is that it doesn't really dilute and turn into a green in the same way a yellow ochre or a cadmium yellow would, a lemon yellow. That's why it's great when working on snowy scenes. So just a little bit of that light, not too much, and it's towards the center, not the edges. It's a great highlight pigment for asserting form. You don't want to use too much of it though. And a little finger painting. Now we'll move over to the left-hand side here, and we'll start by mixing a bit of our brighter hue for the snow, which again is a little bit of that ultramarine blue, a little bit of the Naples yellow, a lot of titanium white, and you can do a hint of Mars black, don't have to, but if you want to desaturate it, it's an easy way of going about it. We'll apply this initially on the top of this larger snow mound, closest to the sun. We'll also do it on the areas through the center, which will be receiving the most light. Like that. And even place it right on these drawn lines, and then have it work its way down. So, once we have that implemented, we'll go for a slightly darker hue and slightly more blue hue. So not quite this, because that is reserved for the real foreground. We want something more akin to what we have here. A bit more of a middle ground blue. Can have a hint of red, something we didn't include in that, but we did in the initial on the right hand side, and we can always go back and add it. This, as you can see, is far too much red, so we'll actually end up doing a quite large mix here. And that's why you want to very slowly add in your hues, because they make a dramatic change, and when they do, you have to input a grand amount of your titanium white and Mars black to find the correct hue. I like this one a lot. It's a little bit more pink, a little bit more purple, which is what we want for the background. Do a little test on the other side. Fits in well. Just blend that out. So, we'll place this in the areas that are not highlighted. But we're not blending any of it yet, because we don't want to dilute our pigment before we've applied it into all of the other areas that we need it. There we go. So, that's applied. We can grab a little bit more of the yellow, start a blend. Softly working my way up. It's a tap and a drag for the most part. We're working wet onto dry right now, so I'm relying on my brush being damp for the blends. And you can tell there's a big difference between this side and this side. That's why we like to work in layers. Now, let's go back to working on a bit more of the highlighted pigment. This time I'll work a little bit of red in there. Maybe a small amount of blue, but not much. Work this down, soften that purple, especially towards the back and the open area.
We can do it a little bit back here as well once we start to run out of paint and it's heavily dissipated. Much better. See that? Now we're doing some wet into wet because the purple is still not dry. And we can instigate a bit of a harder marking, more dimensional snow by starting to work in these sharper golden applications. So we have these soft bends and dips. We also have these harder ones. Now we'll continue working down here, but as we do, remember, we work into more heavy blues, and we definitely incorporate some Mars Black because we can't have those blues being too saturated. Now I still have a hint of the pigment that we used for the foreground up here on my palette. I do clean my palette somewhat in between the painting and after the paintings with a drywall scraper. And I did do that a little bit, but I tried to keep a hint of each pigment. That way I could still use them for reference while we're painting. That said, if you also use a drywall scraper to clean your plastic palettes or glass palettes, do be careful. Easy to kind of nick yourself in those scenarios, especially when you're applying real pressure and the paint's dried to a degree. So just try to be mindful of that and be safe should you work with that. We'll do a little bit of this blue up here just so that it's cohesive. Get a hint of that blend. There we go. And we'll make sure our brush is nice and damp. Grab that titanium white, Naples yellow, far too much Naples yellow. I'm actually going to mix this a little bit farther away so that I don't have to counter all of that. Hint of our blue. Now this is essentially a bit of a wall. More vertical. Here too, here as well. They're a lot higher over here. And then we'll work it one of the tops. We'll start doing a little bit of our blends. First layers always look a little awkward. It's okay. There we go. Now we can start getting into a bit more of the niche markings and applications, really building some form. And because this is a bit smaller, I think we're actually going to get you closer, and I'm going to switch brushes. So as we can see, that is a lot more harsh on every level than what we have over here. So we're going to want to start softening it a little bit. We'll grab our blue, blend that up. And by the way, I've switched to a filbert brush. So as you can see, the edges are a little bit more rounded, while the top is sharp. So I can do these really soft blends with the edge of the brush. And if I want, I can get a sharp line with the top of it. It's very versatile. Great for snow because you do want a lot of softening, but you also want harsher markings occasionally. And it just ensures you can do both. So that's what we switched to. Use some soft blends up here while we're at it. It's a lot easier now than it was with the previous brush. Said we do need more of our darker pigment, so we'll mix that. It's actually much darker than what we've worked with previously. And that is perfect. So We'll just jump back and forth between these two hues for a little bit, creating some extra separation in our snow, so it's multiple pieces. Just makes it a bit more interesting. Going to create a separation between this batch and this as well. So we have our darker area, then we move toward a highlight, and then we have the next batch of snow. It's a little bit farther back, and it has this shadow because of course it's opposite to the light. Then we have that highlight, but this shadow will accentuate this highlight, which was getting lost. So that's the real purpose of doing this right here. We're just trying to create a little bit more contrast. There we go. Now, this is important. We made that a lot darker than that side. And in this scenario, we have two options. We could take a little bit of that darker pigment that we have over here, just start working that on the right, Make it cohesive, make it so that both fit together. I'm just going in the previously darkest areas of this and further increasing that contrast. Or we can go over here and we can soften. Now, I'm personally going to go with secret option C, which is to do both. I felt like this side could use a little bit more contrast in value and hue, and I felt like this side could use a little bit less. So, we're just going to use this pigment while it's still wet over here for a second. I think that looks great. Now I'll head back over here with, for the most part, our titanium white, a little bit of the blue, a little bit of the Naples yellow. We'll further define some of those more important portions. And then we'll work over the darker ones with a very soft touch and lighten them just like that. It'll also give it a look as if the snow is blowing a little bit, which I think is quite nice. There we go. Now I'll head a bit farther down and we'll start working on the ice that lines portions of our snow. And we're doing that because we want our water to be washing over portions of that ice. So to get the layering process correct, we need to start here. So with that, I have a new pigment on my palette, that being a cadmium yellow. You can also use a lemon yellow, but we don't need much of it. We're just going to use it to render a bit of a green. And we can do that over here. So we'll use a hint of that. Our ultramarine blue, you can already see that it has a green hue to it, at least in relation to everything else, but we need quite a bit. So more yellow, more blue. Then we need to desaturate it. So titanium white, Mars black. And while it is a green, we want it to be a bit more blue heavy than yellow heavy. So we'll incorporate that and more titanium white. Don't want too dark of a pigment, especially initially. So we'll just work these back and forth until we have a fairly desaturated mid-value green. Just like that. Now, I want to apply this around the base of our snow. first while I have an abundance of paint and a wet brush, because again, this is our prime opportune time to render the sharpest markings. There you can see it got a little bit harder, so I'm grabbing more water, more paint, and I'm getting back to it. Now we'll work our way around the edge of this one. The water will cover the majority of this portion, but it'll get lost in that water and it'll look really nice. Right now, it'll look a little awkward. That's okay. It's all part of the process. I'm going to try to soften the edges a little bit as they blend off into where the water will be. So I'm just going over it with next to no pressure. And then, of course, once we have all of our edges established, we can go back in towards the center and just fill that in. We can also clean up the edges of our snow later, but I don't want to jump back and forth too much right now, and we'll focus on our ice. Make sure that you have a nice thick layer too. Okay, so we'll take a step back here, just so that we can look at it all at once. We have a better context for how large these are in relation to each other, and by taking a step back, we can ensure that as we paint them, they all look different, which is important. We're just making it look natural, right? So this has a dramatically different shape than what we have over on the right, but it's still directional and it points the eye up towards the top of the painting, which is nice. Now we'll paint a little bit of the ice up here, trying to keep my hand out of the way. Apologies if I am not successful fully. And we're not going to line the entirety of it, just bits and pieces here and there. Using the reference photo to a point, but I'm also taking artistic liberties, as I feel like reference photos are fantastic for introducing you to ideas that you wouldn't innately think of and taking you out of kind of your preconceived idea of what a subject is so that it isn't overly simplified. We interject additional things, additional pieces and subjects because of it, but I don't ever want it to feel like it's kind of constraining me or you and locking you into doing something very specific. Because often I think photographs can be improved compositionally with the hues, all of it. So we take the very beneficial portions and then we play with what we feel inspired to. And I heavily implore you to do the same with these lessons, by the way. These are really meant to inspire you, help you to learn, get you started, but they're not meant to lock you into a certain idea. So if you'd like to try something different, whether it be dramatic or otherwise, please feel welcome to. Have fun with it, make it your own, or continue the tutorial exactly as I'm doing it. I'm just saying there isn't a right or wrong way of going about it, and we shouldn't feel that way when we're watching a lesson or looking at a reference photo. That said, we have our base layer in for most of this. Make sure that they're all nice and thick. If they're not, do a second layer. And then we get a little bit closer again, start working in some details. Now, for the details, we're going to switch back to the filbert brush because again, it has those nice rounded edges for softer blends. And we'll grab some titanium white, mix that into our previous color, get something a bit brighter, and we can even interject slightly more of our yellow because the titanium white will desaturate it to a point. So we're going to paint a little bit more of the ice that's a bit higher up, not sunken into the water to the same degree. So you can see that I'm placing it more so towards the middle, and then I'm blending off the side so that it's dissipating. Then we can have it be a bit darker as it's right under the ice too, because that will create a shadow. And then we'll work that towards the edge and the area that will receive the most light, just like so. Now, we're not done there, but we do want to apply that same general idea to the rest of these. And I am painting wet and to dry right now. Base layer is fully dry, but the damp brush mixed with the water is giving us a nice smooth blend. You can see that I'm sticking towards the edge for the most part and letting it get darker as we move in towards the snow, because that snow is creating that shadow. And here should be brightest right around this area, because we'll have a shadow from this, right? We'll just blend into that. We'll have shadows over here. We'll have probably a slight opening of light right through there. But then it needs to get darker as we move behind this especially. There we go. And we'll just have a soft blend. Said, we do need to make it brighter, yet again. More titanium white. We'll make sure that it still has that nice green hint to it. Don't want it to be too yellow though. So bounce back and forth between the blue, the white, and the yellow until we get pigment we really want. Maybe a little bit more blue. We don't go with the first color we mix. We find the one we actually really want to work with, especially when we're applying this much of it. I'm just splashing this amongst our previous applications. Softening the darkest of areas a little bit. You can see that it's a constant progression. There we go. Now we're getting into the dramatic changes. Won't go too much brighter than this, but I think this looks really nice. So, and again, the light's coming down here. So on the left-hand side of the canvas, the right-hand side of the ice gets the highlight, and on the right-hand side of the canvas, the left-hand side of the ice gets the highlight. So it's a little counterintuitive initially, but if you always just think what area of this is going to be touching light, it comes together quickly enough. There we go. It's a little visually ambiguous right now, but I like that a lot. And then you can put little lines and markings into it, cracks in the ice, or just distinguishing features. Little separations, little parts that build up. Just like that. Little speckles and spots. You don't want to do too much, but here and there it's be a really nice touch. And I'm making the back a lot brighter in general because it's just going to have more light in general. So I'll have that washed out a little bit, especially in the shadows. Softening those. And then we let it progressively get to that higher contrast, a bit darker as you move towards the foreground. So I spent the last day painting this to be water. I changed it from the reference photo because I wanted it to be a bit more flowing and active, but ultimately I landed on the idea that while I wanted to change it from the reference photo, I didn't want to add more water. I wanted significantly less to really highlight that water and the shine that I can get from the light in the background. So I've painted over everything that I did end up doing. We now have just a nice clean white, somewhat like the canvas. And now we're going to go in and paint this quite differently, but in a way that I think will really aid the painting in the end. So here I have my 1-inch flat-headed brush. We're going to grab a good amount of our titanium white, a little bit of our ultramarine blue, our yellow, and as you can probably already assume, we are remixing the ice pigment, which means we also need some Mars black. We want to desaturate it, but we also don't want the brightest pigment initially because we want room to build it up. So we'll grab all of these pigments back and forth till we have a nice decent sized amount, as we do need to cover a lot of space. And with this, I think we'll begin closer to the foreground. This is a pigment that matches the edge of the ice that we just painted fairly well. You can see that right there. We'll connect it to this side. And we'll just cover that middle portion. Again, much easier when we have an abundance of paint. This is definitely something that I want to apply somewhat quickly, at least in large chunks, because I'm going to want to adapt it, make it a little brighter, make it a little darker in portions, and it'll just be easier to do so wet into wet. It isn't necessary, but we do already have the experience of just painting the ice. So we're familiar with the palette. We've worked with this brush quite a lot, and it's something that we can kind of work through a little bit more quickly, which is great. There we go. Trying to keep my hand out of the way for you, but I do apologize if it covers up here and there. Trying to use that nice sharp edge of the brush to cut along the edge of the snow and the ice. Just like so. Even matches the ice up here quite well. And I think I want to work within this space, so I'm just going to do a soft blend upwards. That way I don't have a hard edge when I try to do a wet into dry blend up here later. With that, let's mix up a slightly darker variant of what we're working with. So same pigments, just more Mars black than before. Still a blue heavy green. And I want there to be a good amount of shimmer. A little bit of water through here, so we'll make this area darker. We'll make a little darker through here. Have it come up, and we'll just soften these markings by going over them softly. Pretty intuitive. Not applying much pressure with the brush. You can see that it's brighter around there. We can also switch to the filbert brush for this, as would be easier with the edges. But these are essentially sunken in areas of ice. It'll create some depth within the ice for us. And you know what? let's make the brighter version as it's starting to dry to blend with the current. And if you don't get it in the first go, that's okay. We can do multiple layers, we can build it up, we can go back and forth. As you saw, I did the entirety of the bottom a very different way. And then I covered it up and I said, you know what? We can start again, we can have fun, see how we can take it in a slightly different way. Or quite a different way. There we are. I think we need a bit more blue in that. Might be a little much. There we go. We're just trying to blend things together fairly softly. Like so. I'm going to take this pigment, work it up a little bit higher. Continue to just cover that white of the canvas that you should still have, because you didn't have to paint over it. Okay, so far so good. Grab some of that darker pigment again. Work that back in here. It's a bit more subtle now that we have the softer blends. It's turning out nicely. Ice can have such a neat aesthetic, and you can paint it in a way that you can paint almost nothing else, you know? It's such an opportunity to create a unique piece. Yet again, cutting around these edges. As we get towards the back, I do want to make it brighter as we're getting closer and closer to that light. Nice diffused light. So, grab more of that bright pigment. In fact, we'll brighten it up to an even greater degree. Has a nice contrast with our snow as well. Gives us an added hue back here. Though we will be adding a lot of Naples yellow on top in the distance. And we'll just do a softer blend down. You can see that I'm doing just a vast amount of soft brush strokes, not a singular hard one. Now, I'll take this brush, put it to the side, pick up our filbert brush. So, nice sharp top, round edges. I'll get you a little bit closer and we'll really start shaping this. So, as we get closer, you can see that it's a little bit rough around the edges, but we can take this brush and clean up a lot of it. You can do a slightly different variants of our bluish green. Here, we're going with a slightly more green hue. Behind the snow, acts a little bit almost like a reflection. We can take that again. You can see that it's slightly darker than the rest of the ice. So in these spots where the sun's coming down, it'll cast a little bit of a shadow, we can use it. Just like so. Here, I'm going to repaint in this area of snow. But for now, we'll just implement those shadows a little bit. Nice and easy. Let's get a slightly, or let's remix this color. That way we can fix up the somewhat open areas. This is typically a result of painting quickly, which we did to keep it wet into wet, but it does mean we need to do touch-ups a little bit here and there, as things won't always be as thick and well applied as we'd like. And the additional layers will just make it look a lot better. So we'll wrap this around, make it nice and soft with the rounded edge of the brush, like so. Really love painting scenes like this. Okay. Soften this a little bit. Now it's ice, so you will have harder scratches occasionally, and it's okay to leave those in if they just naturally occur and you like their positioning, their shape in general. But I don't want you to feel like you have to leave them in. I want to make it abundantly clear that we can go back, we can add, we can change. We're not locked into a solitary application or look once it's done wet. This is all wet and to dry. Everything is dried. There we go. Let's remix that highlight pigment. I think it has a little bit more blue in it. There we are. See? You get quicker with it. I think we'll blend it out from this area. Use that rounded edge. Have it work its way through here. You can see that there's a bit of a highlight, bit of a break, bit of a highlight, bit of a break, bit of a highlight. And all of the darker areas are going to be areas where a little bit of water can pool. And in said pools, we get some golden highlights of water, but in a very small amount. Again, I tried the painting with a lot of water because I didn't love the amount in the reference photo. And then I realized that it wasn't a lot that I wanted, it was next to none. Just a lot of ice. But I still wanted that glow that it provided. So it's all about just going back and forth until you have your version. I know that this area is also very messy right now. we will get back to that. But for now, I want to continue brightening. Add this here. Add it here. All of those pre-established areas. Do a little finger painting. Never too old for finger painting. You know, I spent the last day, maybe day and a half, painting the water a different way. And it was taking so long. And normally that isn't an issue. It isn't something I mind. I like painting. I like spending time here at the easel. It was all fun. It was enjoyable. I like trying to solve that puzzle. But when you figure out what you really want, it can just go so much quicker. I feel like I'm already, like I can see what it's going to be. I know that I'm already happier with it than what it was in that much more grand time at the easel. And it's just one of those reminders that sometimes you just find things in life that fit, and life just helps make it fit for you. I love it. I feel like we're there with this subject in the painting. Trying hard to make this blend on both the left and right hand side of a lot of these highlights, because there really won't be an area there won't be a side that's much brighter. It'll be it as a whole. I'm just going back into those brighter areas. Also, something I'm doing is I'm doing a lot of finger painting, just blending with that rather than my brush, because I still have a lot of paint on my brush, and I didn't want to dramatically change the value or apply a lot of pigment in one space, but it is a little bit risky, because when we do so, we transfer the oils from our hands onto the canvas, and when you do that, you make that area much harder to put paint and water on, and sometimes you can get this splotch, this area that just doesn't take the paint. Be careful of that, and if you do this much finger painting, which again, big fan of finger painting, just recommend heavily washing your hands beforehand with soap. Make sure that they're nice and clean. They don't have a lot of just built up oil on them. You're not too sweaty, which I know sounds like a silly thing when you're painting, but it can happen. I know that I like to turn the heat up far more than most. Creature of comfort, I suppose. But just things to be cognizant and aware of. Okay, so I'm going to temporarily move you back a little bit. That way you can see it more as a whole, more naturally. This is, again, just what you see when you walk, more akin to what you see when you walk, and then you go up to a painting and you look at it, because we're not normally, half a foot away like the camera just was. Also, because I decided to repaint about a day's worth of this, there are definitely lessons and ideas that I want to convey in it that I may have said in that day, but I may have said it beforehand. So this might be a lesson where verbally I'm a little repetitive on the general ideas and rules, and I apologize for that. There are things that I want to ensure that I say, because I think they're very valuable lessons, but I may have to say them multiple times now, because I just don't know when I said it, if it was in the part we kind of fast forwarded through because we decided to repaint it, or if it's something that was already said during the snow. Like our current pigments, these things just tend to blend to a point. Something I would like you to take note of, just how long I'm taking to build up these highlights. It wasn't just an immediate thing. It wasn't, oh, let's add a massive amount of light to these. It's, it's a process. It's a measured process. And that's okay. There we are. let's switch brushes again to the liner. Now you see how we previously established those details? That's something I'd like to do to a greater degree. So, mix up some of those nice highlights. I'm going to continue them from here in the beginning because I like what we've established and I think it's worth moving from that area outwards. All of this little line work actually can look like a great detail in ice. And I also really like a tap and speckled effect towards those highlights. So here you can see it from a distance. That's intentional so that you can see just how subtle it is from a distance. We will pull in closer for part of it, but the first thing I want you to recognize is that we're not overdoing it. But we're essentially just doing a little tap out from the primary highlights. And I can do that from really all of these highlighted areas. It stands out nicely in that darker portion, but this gives the ice a little bit of texture. Makes it feel like there might be a little bit of snow on top of it too. Not a lot, but just enough to make it a bit more natural, but also a bit more unique. You can see that I'm starting to work my way up. We don't want too much up here because it's getting farther away and we just won't see that level of detail. But we'll see a little bit. It can also help us bridge gaps between highlights. So let's get you closer for the technique. Okay, so here we are, a bit closer, grabbing pigment. And when I first grab pigment, we have a lot on our brush, right? So I'm going to try to get that in large part off elsewhere. And I can tell that I actually just want this to be a little bit more blue, a little bit more bright. So add in extra white and blue. Now yet again I have a lot more pigment on my brush, so I'll just get that off in the pre-existing brighter areas, taps and drags, and then when I start to run out of it, I can migrate to this area, connect these two a little bit, have little spots that stick out, but it's a tap that essentially originates from those much brighter areas, those spots that we've pre-established via the flat-headed and filbert brush. There we go. It's turning into a real Canadian painting, isn't it? Feel like I've seen and walked this path so many times as a little one. Just slid around. When I was just a boy, we had this area behind the house. And every year, it would freeze. And we'd get essentially this big ice rink. And my dad, he'd go out and he'd shovel it for me and my friends. And then I could be really, really bad on skates and just kind of slide around. And it was great memories. It was really good memories. Have the friends over. Mom would come out, take pictures. Once out back there. I got stuck. My boot went under and it did not come back up. All those silly little memories that make growing up great, right? But this is very much a scene that brings me back to those ideas. I think that's one of the wonderful parts of painting. It can take you places in your head. Whether it be on vacations, whether it be spots you've never been to before, or memories and paths that you love and you want to spend more time in, you want to relive. Art's really special for that. We're definitely in the advent of AI art, which I think is really interesting. And it may replace artwork and some graphic design, but what it won't ever take away is just the pure pleasure of making something and creating. Putting something out into the world that's from your head and your hands. And I love that. Let's go with a slightly darker mix. So Mars black, yellow, or white. Every time I do this, I realize I want more blue in the mix. Maybe that's a mental note that can help you as well. I feel like a lot of us will innately go to a more blue or more yellow heavy mix. It's good to know where you stand. That way you can kind of pre-mix away from what you naturally feel you inclined to do but don't want to. So many subtle little markings. Love doing them with this brush. Which, by the way, is from the brush set that we use on this channel for all of the lessons. We've been doing so since the start of the year, and it's now essentially been about a full year, which is really, really neat. But if you'd like to work with the exact same brushes that I am, there's a link to them in the video description. I designed all of them very specifically for the lessons on this channel. We even have a very unique fan brush that acts as both a soft bristled and a stiff bristled fan brush. I used to jump between two different ones, but now we just need the one. And what makes me really proud about this brush set is that it's entirely vegan and cruelty free. All of the bristles are synthetic. You don't have to worry about the glue that's been used. And if any sweet little creatures were harmed in the making of it. Really proud that we did that this year. Really proud. And again, if you'd like to pick it up, you can. It's in the description. But I'm getting a lot of fine markings with this little guy. Really love how it's held up over the last year. There we go. Okay, so stepping back, really like how it's turning out, but we do need to fix this little guy right here. So grab some of that ultramarine blue and a little bit of titanium white. Don't have too much left on the palette, should definitely get more right after this. But we'll mix up a good base layer for that darker backing pigment, which is pre-established. You can see it's in here as well. We can do a little test, and build it up. Nice and easy. Then we do make it brighter. Extra titanium white, It's facing that way. And it's a little bit centered, so both the left and the right hand side will adopt some of that highlight. With the left hand side getting more because it's just bowing to a greater degree. Just have that light wrapping around it. Slightly more. Take this brush, put it down, because that light does have some warmth in it. We do need some Naples yellow, but we don't need an ocean of it. So, mix that here. Craft a nice sharp top, edge. Have that light work its way through that bowing section. There we go. And we do need to clean up some of the other edging. So we can do that now. We don't want it to be just an outline, so we blend it back into the subject. There we are. Quite pretty. Not too tricky either. That said, we can work on the actual water here. But before we do, I want to establish a lot of the trees, the foliage, or the branches, because I want to see how much contrast we have to work with and how much light I really want to bring down into this area. So we'll progress through it, but very naturally, and we'll take our time. With that, just taking a look at it while we have all of our current pigments out, mixes the way they are. Taking a couple of steps back. And I think I want to just quickly take some of our Ultramarine blue, Mars black, a little bit of our titanium white, mix up a nice shadow pigment. We can also have a hint of our cadmium yellow, just to give it a splash of green, because we are going to be doing these reflections in the ice, and the ice does have green in it. I'm just going to place this, maybe it's a little bit too dark. Try that. Place this a little bit too bright. Place this right behind this bit of snow. Have it blend its way out. You can also do this with the filbert brush because it has that nice natural blend to it, but I'm feeling fairly confident with this brush after the amount of practice we've had. So I'm just placing this under and around, behind some of those areas that just aren't going to get light. You don't need to do a grand amount. Just a little shadow here and there can make a big difference. See that? It's a quick technique, it's an easy technique, but it has a real impact. Especially towards the distance, but we do want it to get brighter slightly in the distance, so we'll add a hint more titanium white, because the light from the back is just going to wash out a lot of the shadows. So not too much back here. And if it gets a little too dark, we can always just brighten that pigment and go back in. But I think that's quite nice. Okay. Let's get a little bit closer yet again. Okay, so we're a bit closer. We have our liner brush. It is nice and damp. We'll grab some new Mars Black. We'll throw in some of our Ultramarine blue because you want it to have a nice cool hue like the rest of the painting. We want it to be cohesive. And then we'll also work in a little bit of our titanium white. We'll take the excess off of our brush. It's a notification right there. And then we'll start painting in some smaller branches. Now these are actually the largest of our smaller branches, and I'm going to begin by essentially establishing the larger base for all of them. And then we'll have them start to kind of fork out in different directions and become something much more unique. But towards the bottom, we want to make our marking a little bit larger. We want to apply more pressure. And then towards the top, it's less pressure. And we get something smaller. Like that. You can see the variance in size. It's all easily controllable. By just changing how much force we apply to our brush. You see that there are a lot of unique little movements in these. Something that we definitely want is for them to cross over with one another. That's going to make it look much more natural, three-dimensional. You can see that the pigment's starting to run out. It's okay as long as we don't force additional pressure into it. If we do, we'll get a larger marking and something that looks quite messy. But if we keep the minimal pressure, what happens is it essentially just becomes semi-transparent because of the water. And that makes it look a little bit farther away. It just looks like the hues, the light are reflecting off the snow onto it, making a more subtle aesthetic. I really like to control my breathing while I paint really tiny markings like that, which is why I get a bit quieter. We're not going to do too many branches on these initially because we want to do a lot of them, a lot of different areas of them. And we don't want to overdo it in any one area, forcing us to overdo it in another and attempt to balance it. So it's a less is more technique approach. There we are. They get smaller the farther away they get, but they're always different. You can see that there are really tiny ones in here, but there are also larger ones. It's just that as we get farther away, the larger ones become more and more rare. I think I actually want to make it brighter for back there. It's a little too stark for that area. And it's another notification. It's painting time. What's going on? Okay, I like this side a lot. Let's jump to the other side of the canvas. So, heading over here, yet again I'm going to begin by crafting the primary body of these branches, the largest portion, which we will expand upon somewhat shortly. But it's all about steps, right? We can even do a bit of a smaller extension of the tree down here. I think that can be fun. Little taps here and there, just different pieces of wood and essentially natural debris. Then we can work in our branches with these. We really do want to give it a bit of a jittery look. These aren't clean, soft bends. There's little swipes back and forth. Really trying to keep it natural. Again, apologies for getting a little quiet in these. Now we'll work on the ones that are a little bit farther away. And as noted, we do want to brighten them up a bit. So we'll still use our blue, we'll still use our Mars black, but we will incorporate more titanium white than we did previously. And we'll make sure that our brush doesn't have too much excess paint. It's nice and damp. We'll head into that distance. And the farther we get, the less branches we'll be able to incorporate. So initially, well, I would just paint the primary branches. Now, I'm essentially painting all of them in that process, just because we don't have that many to expand upon. Here we have a cluster of them, a line. And in that, we just want a couple that stick out, a couple that look unique, but for the most part, it's a bit more of a condensed application. We're really applying next to no pressure so that we can get a very distant look. So we can continue to portray the depth that we want to. Here it's almost just little taps throughout. We have a bit of a taller one here. I feel like my markings were a little too soft, so I'm trying to make them more sporadic. Cross over with each other. There we are. And I'm going back and forth, side to side, just so that we don't accidentally do too much on one side. I can kind of look at this, compare, contrast, back and forth. Also, despite the fact that this is brighter, we can still instigate little pieces of it into the foreground. It's just going to be more subtle. That's not a bad thing. So here we just have lots of little taps, the occasional drag, but we're filling out the areas of these feel a bit more fitting in the space. There we go. I think we need a bit more paint for this one. I like how that looks a lot. Just a little tap with my hand because I had slightly more paint on there than I wanted. In the real distance here, it's just taps. There are trees in the reference photo, but I feel like there's a little too much detail there. And I don't want that much. So I'm going to avoid those trees. I don't want to overcomplicate it. We may place them in later. It'll be easy to do so because the larger trees here will essentially be silhouettes, but that's something to do in time as we see the piece progress. Now, something you can do but don't have to, we'll grab some of our ultramarine blue, titanium white, hint of Mars black, not too much. We want this to be a bit of a brighter pigment. And we'll mix up a brighter grayish blue, which we can add to the top and crevices of some of these branches. Any area that snow can fall and sit on. We don't need to do too much of it. Just a hint here or there can convey what we want to. And this will essentially just make it feel like it really fits in with the scene, right? It's not too stark, now it's a bit more three-dimensional, it has something on top of it. Not doing much, just enough. It also doesn't have to be bright to the point where it stands out greatly from the snow. If it looks similar, it's not a bad thing. If it kind of blends a little bit, gets lost in there, doesn't need to be wildly stark because the branches themselves are already quite stark. We'll just move over to the left-hand side here. Continue that same idea. Bounce around. Deliver that snow. Then it's not always on the right-hand side or the left-hand side. It's whatever area is leveled to a point or where there's a joint that can be filled in. There we go. Again, there doesn't have to be too much. Just bits and pieces. So now we'll move on to some actual trees, starting in the real distance. And this is going to have a lot of more light moving through it, wrapping around it, than the trees that we have up here. So I'm going to actually start with a bit of a Naples yellow. We'll grab a hint of our Cad red, significantly more Naples yellow than Cad red though, because again, it's just a much stronger pigment. We'll grab a hint of titanium white and Mars black. We want to desaturate this. And that should be great for our backing tree. So, taking the excess paint off my brush, making it nice and damp, we'll go in for layer number 1. Trying to make my brushstrokes slightly jagged and unique. Now I'm just following my drawing, trying to extend a lot of these branches, a lot of this foliage, while still leaving openings predominantly towards the edge, and then in the middle you have a lot more of a cluster. All those branches are condensed, overlapping each other, so it gets significantly more full. Then towards the bottom here, yet again, we can have openings. I just looked at it in the viewfinder, and it's not the most aesthetic thing right now. And that's okay. It's part of the process. Don't get down. If it doesn't look incredible from the very first stroke, we have a lot to build on. So, build we shall. I like to do my edges first while I have a lot of water on my brush, while I have that pigment, while I have the most control I will have. And then as I start to run out, we move towards the body and fill in more portions. And we'll just work our way here. It's going to get a lot darker at this point, but having this as a pigment to work with is going to help us with our dimension. So I'll just splash it about and continue creating sharp markings for these down here. Using the smallest brush, the lightest amount of pressure I have been. There we go. Trying to make the branches unique and crisscross. Stands out really nicely over the glow in the background. Again, looks a little messy right now. It's okay. We will take this though, and we'll just paint in some little bushes and markings akin to what we have there, but they're just slightly farther back. This will make it all feel nice and cohesive. You can even paint the implication of a tree or two. Again, something I didn't want to do with the darker pigment, but here it fits. Here it makes sense. Don't want to do too much of it though, because we are going to have a lot of other branches in this vicinity very soon. And we can always go back and add more of this. So, from there, we'll add some extra Mars black into that mix. I still want it to be a similar warm hue, at least for now. So, grab some water, grab that pigment, and that's a very fast transition. Let's make it a bit brighter. Not by a lot, but a little bit. There we go. And yet again, we instigate those branches. I'm doing it predominantly from the center here, and I can move it into the center of this one. But we don't want to get the edges really, at least here, because this is just where that light can't get to. It's too dense, and it's just going to create a good look. We can bring this down. These, make sure that they're expanding and getting larger as we get down towards the bottom. And then this can become the new standard for the edge of the branch because we're moving farther away from the light. So now this is how we do these guys. And then I do a little bit of a tap, the same way we did with this, just to bring it forward. We get to that nice messy stage. Mars black, titanium white. We'll go a hint of red and blue. We'll start transitioning it into a purple. There we go. And we can transition this into the body of the last pigment a little bit. I think you can probably see how it's starting to build. We can also use this for the base of our tree right here. It's not close to us, but it's not far. Remember that it does need to get larger as we move towards the bottom. So we just expand. And we'll create some branches that work around, make it feel nice and unique. And we're at the point where we're not really going to have openings, shy of maybe a couple along the edges. So we can kind of fill in the body here. And for that, we will switch our brush. 1 inch flat. Make sure it's nice and damp. Mars Black. We will still use a bit of that red. Not for too much longer. Hint of the titanium white. And I'm going to avoid the edges for now for the most part. You can see that they're drawn on, but I'm not going to work in there too quickly. I think I want it to be slightly brighter as well, just for a bit of a transition. And we can use this with a bit more water. To work our way down, work our way up. You can see that I made one solitary line. Typically I don't like to do that with trees because I feel like it makes them look unnatural, but for this type of tree I don't mind it. But in general, the way I like to approach it, I'll do it here. Line, 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 line. You can see how it has much more ornate curvature. There's some texture in the edge. It's typically my favorite way. I think both work on this piece though. But that isn't how I'd generally advise painting the base of your trees. Said, we can definitely move into a much more blue heavy mix. It's a bit darker. Doesn't need to be that stark. That's why we add the white, brighten it up a bit, but also it allows the hues to come through. Now you can see we have the transition from the purple to the darker blue. You can run this on the backhand side so the front is a bit warmer. We can do that here too. We can always go back and re-interject that bright pigment though. It's not too tricky. And from here on out, it's a much more blue mixture. It can get slightly more stark, but I don't think we need it to. In fact, I might make a lot of it more blue. Let's give it a try. You know what? I like that better. I like it with the extra hue. It's not a big difference, but there is a difference. And again, I'm not really getting the edges right now. I think we're almost at the point where I should probably move the camera. I'm just going to, almost forgot the titanium white. I'm just going to get the base here of a couple more trees, and we'll get you on the move. So for this one, we have this tree. You can see that I'm making it through multiple markings. If the bottom of it isn't really clean, it's okay. We can always go back in and add more snow. There we are. Maybe. Yeah. That's neat. So, as we step back, it looks a little messy, and that's okay. But what we can really notice is the transition from the orange to a little bit more of the reddish pigment and the purple, and then the purple into the blue, and that's really the goal there. Now we're going to mix a lot of paint because we only tackled half of the canvas and we didn't even do the details in that yet. So what we're going to do is we'll mix up a good amount of it for the other side. Start working this in, down, starting with the edges. These aren't too big, so you can kind of get the middle at the same time, sometimes. But the more you do, the more comfortable you get, the faster you can be. You can see that it's really just coming together at this point. I can tell that I'm running out of paint though. So we'll get a bit of extra water, grab that pigment. Hoping my hand is not in the way. There we go. Oh, I really like that. Now, I heavily altered the reference photo in that I essentially took this part of the painting and then I flipped it horizontally and I put it over there. So if you're working with the reference photo and you're looking like, oh, that's oddly similar, it's because it's actually the same. I just wanted to change the composition quite a bit. So do feel free to take liberties and just make little changes here and there so it isn't an exact mirror. I think there will naturally just be enough change from side to side. But it is something to keep in the back of your head, that diversity is quite good. And that if you have an opportunity to implement it, it's a good call. Just giving it a good coat. We don't have the orange on this side because I didn't trail it back. That said, we are working with acrylics, so 2 layers is better than 1. And I think this one might be a little bit brighter, a little bit more blue. That's the beauty of multiple layers. You have opportunities to make changes and turn it into what you really want it to be. So, now we're going to switch to a brand new brush. This one is a flathead, but it's smaller, tighter. We can get some real detail work, but we can still pick up a good amount of paint, and we can get those sharp markings through and through. Now with this, we're going to begin working on some of our branches, pieces of foliage that stick out and protrude. We're following a very similar idea as before, in that we want this to be smaller at the end and then get thicker as we move towards the body. See that I'm using my pinky finger to ground my hand. Eliminate shake. So, back at it. A little more aware. Is my hand in the way? It is. You know what? I really love this brush for this process, but I think the way in which I have to hold it is not ideal for filming. So, I'm going to take this brush, we'll put it down, swap back over to a brush I have since lost and found. Exciting. Okay, we have the liner brush in hand. There we go. Much easier. Much easier to film and not cover the markings. That said, if I were you, I think that the smaller flat-headed brush is fantastic for this, and if you have the brush set, I do recommend it for a lot of these. You can also use the liner, but the other one worked great. And this is having me go back to the palette significantly more because it can't hold as much paint. You can see that I'll constantly go back and thicken different portions as well. Fill that in. It's not as ideal, but it still works well, and it still gets the job done nicely. You can see that I'm leaving little openings, little holes. Before we continue proceeding upwards, I think I want to fill out a little bit more of this, clean it up towards the bottom. There we go. I think these swooping markings will be really nice long term. There we go. The more we do, the more natural it'll look, for the most part. Still trying to get them to cross. We can have individual ones that don't present themselves in clusters as well, like this. It's all just building. Smaller one that moves into the distance there. Just let that paint dissipate with the water. Then we get something a bit more semi-transparent. Looks like the light's working its way through it. Can be a good look. A lot of water on my brush though. You can see how I'm just slowly expanding upon them, going back to previous markings. Filling it up. You'll also notice a lot of these are moving inwards. They're not going this way, and that's very intentional because I want them to act as leading lines and push the eye towards the center of the painting. There we go. We can definitely do more, but I don't want to overdo it. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to take a break from this area, this section, grab some of this, and we'll head over to the right-hand side, left-hand side. The viewfinder is mirrored. And we'll start instigating some of these, give this a good transition. You can see it's very thin, which is great for distant branches, but these are much closer, so we do need to thicken it. And I think just like that, we've actually made that transition work well. We can do slightly more of this in there. It doesn't have to be too much. Starting to come together. Quite a relaxing process as well. Very cathartic. And again, if you'd like help with the drawing process, if you're not quite sure where to put your branches, we'll have the traceables up over on Patreon. So if you have a mini projector, you can just put it on there, or if you like to use tracing paper, or if you're like me and you like to look at a version, like a drawn version with a grid, and then you draw your grid and then you match it to the grid, there's that as well. Always upload a gridded and non-gridded version. I'm fairly confident gridded isn't a word, but it is now. We are coining it, as I feel like it just comes up all the time in what we do. Also, I'm not sure if this got cut out of the video when I redid the bottom water, ice, but I am trying something new out on Patreon, which I think is really exciting, in that I'm going to do painting recreations. So I always get asked the question, how do I paint this? How do I paint that? I have this photo that I really want to make, and I thought, you know what? What if we had the opportunity for people to send in a photo of their painting, and then I would recreate it, and I'd show you how I'd go about it. That way you could see different techniques you could incorporate, but you would also see which techniques that I see in yours that I really like, and I recreated in the same way. That way you know where you're really succeeding. So we'll try that. It's at the Great Wide Open tier, I believe. I also put back up the monthly art critique videos that we used to do at the Mighty Oak level. So if you're on there at the Mighty Oak level, do look out for a post fairly soon where I'll give you an email, you can send in your work, and then I'll make a video that I'll put up on the other channel talking about it, what's working, what we can work on. I feel like those used to be a lot of fun. Got a little busy, but rearranged the schedule, and I feel very confident we can get back to that and really enjoy those. There we go. Look at that transition now. Doesn't that look great? Also, don't ever feel shy about saying things like that about your own painting. It used to feel awkward for me, right? But realistically, we're putting a lot of time, effort, thought into these, and it's okay to feel pride in it, to be excited about it, to note said excitement. And I often feel like that's great because it allows us to take note of the parts that we really love. So we know it's working well, we know what we can continue to work with in future paintings, right? Because it's not always about, oh, how do I improve this? How do I make this better? Sometimes it's, I did a really good job here, and it's great, and I'd like to do it again. And taking note of those scenarios can be really important. Cleaning up the edges with this brush would be really nice. We can also clean up the bottoms of our trees, have a bit more control. So many little applications. Build up to something we love. These are still quite thin. Definitely need a more thick paint there. So here we are, a little bit farther away, grabbing more of that pigment, and we can go back to jumping from side to side. That way we don't build too many habits. We can ensure that we're continuously building change within our applications. Still trying to make the ends of them the smallest, and then allowing it to get larger through added pressure. I think I might have a little bit too much water on my brush right now though, so I'm going to try to work with more actual pigment. That's something to always be aware of. Is the paint gliding in the way that you want to? If it's gliding really easily, you probably have a lot of water, but if it's too thin, then it's okay, maybe I add some extra paint. You add that extra paint, and if it doesn't glide, it's okay, maybe add some extra water. And then eventually it becomes very intuitive. But regardless of how intuitive it gets, I think we all still have those moments in the painting where it's like, oh, you know what? I should definitely focus on using more of this or that. I also used to get asked the question a lot, and it's not so frequent anymore, but do I use any additional mediums to help the paint stay wet longer, or to help the glide to make it more semi-transparent? And for me, the only medium I feel like I've ever really wanted or needed was just water, right? Have used thinners in the past, have used thickeners, extenders, but I feel like water really just does it all, and it does it all very consistently. You don't have to jump back and forth between multiple mediums, wondering if they're going to work with one another. And having a singular, incredibly versatile tool, I feel like is often just something I appreciate more than having 6 different tools that aren't versatile. Like being able to jump between ideas and renderings. So if you're ever wondering, it's kind of my stance on that. Just getting this top area. Still a bit of canvas showing here, but we will soon cover all of those open areas, which I feel like is very exciting. Always a milestone to cover the entire canvas with a little bit of paint, even be it a first layer. I feel like the left-hand side ended up adopting a lot more detail than the right. So I'm going to head over there for a second and just build. Have more crisscrossing. And just make sure that it's good and full, the way that the other side is. So now that we have the tops of the silhouettes done, we're going to, again, use our liner brush, make sure that it's nice and damp, and we'll mix up a mid to dark blue for some snow. We're just going to start with a base layer. So this is a similar process to what we did for down here, and I'll even do a little color match. I think that looks really nice, actually. So with this, we're going to start running some snow up the side of the tree, but we're going to do so on the backs of our trees because the light's coming this way. It's melted through the afternoon, the majority of the snow that is facing the light, so we're essentially just left with that which isn't. So I'm going to start tapping this up my tree. We're going to have more at the bottom. It'll be more condensed at the bottom, but it'll still find its way trailing upwards, and we'll just get it sporadically throughout. There we go. Move on to the next tree, and I'll get you closer for this one. It's also worth noting that we are going to be doing multiple layers with this snow, so don't feel like at any point it feels incomplete, because that's just fine. Also, when I'm doing these taps, I'll occasionally work in a drag, predominantly closer to the bottom, and it's essentially just mirroring the idea of there being bark that it catches a hold of. We can also go over branches because we can reinstall them very easily. It's just a silhouette. Here, we have a crevice within the tree. We have this connecting piece. So we're not only going to put it on the back, we'll also put it in between the two because there's a place for that snow to fall and there can be a much larger amount. So even if it does start to melt, it can still be somewhat prominent through that area. And then we'll continue the general process of incorporating it towards the back. Just like so. And we get a little bit quicker with it as we progress, as we get more familiar with the motion. Gets a bit more fluid. So now we'll hop on over to the left-hand side, and light's coming this way, so the back of them this time will be a little bit more towards the left, where on the other side it was a little bit more towards the right. We still have that edge partially without snow, though we can tap it on occasionally. You can see there's an open spot and then some snow, and then we'll have an open spot and some snow. And we're doing that just because that light will wrap around the tree to a degree and render some variance. And once this is done, the other side should be dry enough that we can go back and start incorporating highlights. Here we have another divot between the two trees. Then we can work on the back. You can see the canvas is shaking a little bit. I'm just bracing with my pinky here and there, which is causing a little bit of movement, but I am okay with that, as this is a look that should be sporadic anyway. Now let's make our mix a little bit brighter. Just the interjection of some extra titanium white. Might do a hint more of our Mars black titanium white mix. Just leaving out the blue to a point. Start at the bottom. I'm not going to go over all of my previous markings, just a couple. And we follow the same rule where the majority of it is towards the base. Just like that. Then we can have it on top here. It is a highlight. This is essentially where the light from back here reflects onto the snow, and that snow creates a reflection of that light up onto the snow on the trees. So it's not direct light, it's a reflected light, so it's not very strong, but it is still going to create some level of variance. That's the really neat thing about painting snow. It just creates so many unique reflections. It's like a rainy day sometimes. So, now this side should have also dried appropriately, which means we can build it up a little bit more. Though this too isn't really our final layer, because as we previously talked about, we're working with acrylics. Acrylics are semi-transparent, and as a result, the markings that we're currently making aren't actually the color that we have on our palette. They're an amalgamation of that and the pigment that we already have on our canvas, which is a lot darker. And I do want it to be brighter like what we have on the palette. The only way to do that, well, there are two ways. One is we just work with much more thick pigment. We don't incorporate the water, but I really want the water because I want the thin, sharp markings. And therefore, the only way of doing it with that in mind is that we just build our layers. We let it dry, we go back in with something slightly brighter, because every time our base gets a little bit brighter, and the pigment from our palette, the pigment on our brush, is no longer mixing with the dark base color pigment optically. It's mixing with the newly established color of snow. And I say mixed optically because we're not actually mixing the pigments. This is all dry at this point. It's just, again, an optical blend. Here, making it brighter yet again. You can see the transition. Starting at the bottom. Going to be careful not to do too much. Might even be able to go a little bit brighter, but I think I'm fairly happy with this. What we really need to do is take a couple steps back, look at it from the far side of the room, as that'll give us our best indication on how it works cohesively within the piece. That said, before we do so, we do need to head over to this side, incorporate some taps, and build it up as well. Predominantly towards the bottom, a little bit here and there, ideally over previously tapped markings. That way it builds the highlight the way we intend it to. There we go. Alright, so here we have our little distance test, and I actually like how it's just slightly darker than what we have here. It's much more akin to the shadows, and the shadows more so towards the midsection rather than the shadows in the foreground. These are going to be a lot darker because it's closer, and we just naturally have that contrast. I like that a lot. We're going to move up into the tops of the trees. Now we finally get to add some dimension to these markings. We'll begin with a bit of a darker hue. I think actually similar to what we had for our final step of the last application is actually a great start, because we can build on it, we can make it a lot brighter like the regular snow, like the highlighted snow. So let's actually mix up an abundance of what we were just working with. That looks great. I can still see it in relation to our last mix. Make sure our brush is nice and damp. Grab some of that pigment And we're going to essentially be painting snow on the tops of a lot of these. We'll be going for smoother markings for the most part. You want this to essentially fall on top, so you can place it a little bit on top of the previous marking. You can move it up a millimeter, 2 millimeters, and expand. You don't want to do so in like a grand way, but a little bit's great. Here, this one's upside down. We're actually going to paint it on the bottom. We're not always just painting it on the side that essentially swoops. It's, for the most part, whatever area is facing upwards, because that is there we go. That is how the snow will land and build, right? And now we're working some on the inside. They're all kind of painted to be in between each other. There we go. We'll paint some to be a bit more upright. So we have a lot that are going kind of horizontally. We need to make sure that that's diverse to a degree. We have some on this branch. We can do a little tap on the branch just to give it a bit more of a wood-like texture. That said, we are going to go back over a lot of these portions with a brighter hue similar to that. So we don't need a massive amount. Love that. There we are. Okay, grabbing more water, keeping it nice and sharp. I'll slowly interject more into these clusters. I don't want to do too much at any one time, because it's easy to overdo. And if we commit to a lot here, then we have to commit to a lot on the other side, and we risk it becoming visually overcomplicated. So we're avoiding that by just taking it a little bit slower. Here we're painting our implied branches on the inside, having them work around each other. Slowly filling in a lot of these sections. And this too is something that's going to get faster as we continue the process. But initially, I do recommend really taking your time. Also building clusters here. You'll notice that a lot of these bend this way. That's very intentional, so that they act as leading lines, essentially pushing us towards the middle of the painting. Didn't grab water that time, just went straight for the paint, because I want to make sure that these are a bit thicker. You can see that a couple of these applications got watery. So while we typically do add water, we do want to be quite mindful of our actual mark making and ensure that it's progressing in a way that we really like. There we are. Grabbing more water now. as we essentially used up what we did, and now you can see just how much sharper it got. It does make an impact. I can see that I'm building too much of a pattern there, so I'm going to break it. See that? Now they're running through each other. We're creating something more unique. Much more interesting. As we get towards this edge, we can do less of them, make them less prominent visually. I'm not using much pressure. I don't have an abundance of pigment or water on my brush. And that's intentional. I'm just kind of using what's left because I don't want the eye to go there. I want this to be a bit of a vignette effect. I want this to be brighter because the light's working its way around the tree, where this is much more dense because there's more branches. There we go. I'm going to look at this from a bit of a distance and just make sure we're proceeding as we should. So, distance check. So far, in my opinion, so good. It looks detailed, it looks natural. There's definitely a lot of light we can build to the side, but there's already a bit of a gradient from lighter markings to darker markings, and there isn't a grand noticeable pattern which makes it look unorganic. There are a lot of similar strokes and they follow somewhat similar paths, but I feel like we were able to disrupt them when we needed to. Here you can see there's this cluster, but then there's kind of this darker V shape around it. These are all quite similar, but then they kind of meet their end up here and the pattern changes. These are elongated. That's another thing you can do. You can play with how long they are. We also have, I think, a good mix of ones that swoop down and then other ones that kind of just find their way upwards. So I think that's quite good for a base layer. Let's get back and finish the top. So here we are yet again at a comfortable distance. I remixed a little bit of that paint just because mine was starting to run out and what was left was starting to dry. So it was a confluence of events that really just said, Ryan, mix more paint. So mix more paint we did. Something that I might not have noted was with a lot of these strokes, I try to start them like fairly sharp at the top, and then I apply slightly more pressure through the body so it thickens, and then I let it get smaller again towards the bottom. This just gives it some added dimension. Because right now, realistically, we are just working with, there we go, a silhouette in the background and a highlight on top. And we need to find ways of making that more visually intriguing. We'll build on it, and that will be a way, but this helps too. You see here, I make this marking, I make this one, it comes down, it touches the highlight there, and then I leave about 1.5 millimeters, and then I start it up again. That's because the bottom of the branch will be dark, it won't have that snow on top of it. And these are just little things to consider. I could tell that I was building a bit of a pattern unintentionally. So now I'm trying hard to make very unique markings. As noted, the longer you do this, the more confident you get with it, the quicker you can be. But as a result, that somewhat mindlessness can lead to unintended repetition. So we're just making sure that it's all okay. Remember that as we get towards the right hand side, we want to use a more watery mix, or just have our paint run out a bit, because we don't want a super bright, sharp marking. So I'm just using the paint that I have on my brush elsewhere first, thickening some applications. Then when I feel like we don't have a lot, and we don't have too much, then I'll work my way back over here and just continue some of these more essentially pattern-oriented, balance-oriented strokes. Now, before we add highlights, we are going to head over here to the left-hand side. Continue that general idea, starting with the tops of the branches on the outskirts, and then we work our way in. Now, following a lot of the same rules on this side, except with all of these, they pointed that way, towards the center. These ones are also pointing towards the center, but in the opposite direction, because they're on the opposite side of the center, right? It's fairly intuitive. Lots of little branches through here to highlight, build some depth on. Really enjoy painting these. It's a bit more of a unique look to our trees. You don't normally paint trees like this, but I think that's what makes it so much more fun. It's special, it's unique to this piece. That said, we've incorporated quite a few markings. I think I should probably take a step back and just make sure that we are on the right path. Okay, so I think from a distance I'm actually quite happy with it. We're going to do a little bit of painting from a distance just to make sure that we stay in that right realm. And I'm going to stand farther back from the canvas. I'm going to hold my brush farther back so you can see I'm holding it like this, not like a pencil. Technically, it's correct to hold it like this more often than not, but I like the security of holding it like this. I really started as drawing, so it's just kind of something that innately is there, but this is a great way of creating a bit more of a randomized stroke, as you forfeit some level of control, but you also ensure that you stand farther away, which lets you get that wider perspective. And you don't have to do this, but it moves me back to essentially where you are as well, in the camera with the viewfinder. Which I think is good, here and there. Doing a lot of edge work, making that brush nice and damp. When I do this, I do know that I'm going to have to get a lot tighter, a lot closer to do touch-ups, and that's okay. do like how it's progressing. And with this one, we're approaching it slightly different. And neither approach is wrong, but I want you to know both of them so you can kind of pick your preference or play to create more diversity. But with this, we started from the bottom and we worked our way up for the most part. With this one, I'm starting on the side and I'm working my way to the left. If you have a favorite side of these two, maybe you'll have an inclination of the approach that you want to take. Need to do some that lift up a bit more. That's something I feel like is lacking a little bit. I'll do it towards the bottom where the branches aren't as large and heavy. Want to cut into these a little bit. That way it doesn't feel like two separate sections separated. There we go. That was a good connective piece. You don't have to do as many of these as I am, but you could also do more. It's really dependent upon how you want yours to look, the amount of detail. Here you can see this is quite bright in relation to everything else. So I need to be careful as I move back that way. I'm going to use some of my pigment on previously incorporated branches towards the top of them. That way it can build a little bit of depth. And then when I start to run out, that's when we can work our way over to the left as we've been doing. Really enjoy this. Again, it's a different way of painting trees, but it's rewarding. Very prominent markings. Use this paint towards the edge. Get that pigment off the brush for the most part. You can see that it's actually adding quite a bit of depth, which is really nice. Thickening some portions of snow, but I am trying to be careful not to do that too much. And then we can come back here. And work it down these smaller branches as well. Though they are quite sharp, so I kind of want to be a little bit closer. Now we are closer. Grab that pigment. Line the tops of these. You can see how they're overlapping some of the tree, but not all the time, because some of these branches are going to go in front of it, while others are going to go behind. And the more variance you create there, the more three-dimensional it'll look. So here, this one goes in front, this one is behind. See, still dark, or here we have the light. We'll do another light one right on top. Good, very good. Gonna add little details in here. I feel like I want more that kind of sweep upwards on this side. Now, let's start layering our snow a bit more. So extra titanium white into our mixture. And I do mean quite a bit. You can see that in relation to our previous mix. I'm going to take the excess paint off my brush, make it a little bit damp. Then we'll head towards these edges. Apply it on top. We have to be careful not to make our branches a lot thicker, because this might be our third layer. And every time we do that, we likely expand on it a little bit, just because it's really hard to stay on course with our initial markings. I'm also doing it down here for the most part, initially, and I'll mirror that on this side. And then we allow it to dissipate as we not only move up, but move back. So it gets lesser and lesser. We still want it, just not as much. We let the paint run out. We apply even less pressure despite the fact that we were starting with very little. And just build that snow as we feel it appropriate. But the more you do, the more it A, feels cohesive, but B, that gradient becomes noticeable, right? We just have more light towards the edge of these trees. There we are. Okay, next step, fun step, we'll grab our Naples yellow, our titanium white. We'll make it much more titanium white heavy. Hint of Mars black because we don't want it to be too bright. We can apply a little bit of this highlight to some of these bottom branches that are on the side. Have it move in minorly, but less than the amount that we did with the last highlight. This should be more subtle. There should be less of it, but it is here to complement and aid the hues and the markings that we've previously instilled. Again, not too much, just enough. Acts as a really nice transition, especially on this side. Also, while we're here, we're going to take this a little bit and we'll apply a highlight to the right hand side of this tree. We go to the other side, we'll apply a highlight to the left hand side of this tree. A little bit to this one too. You can see I'm dodging some of the branches. That light will reflect on these, make them look a little bit more three-dimensional. There we are. Softens it a little bit in a nice way. And you can see we're just working our way through a lot of these trees, doing it through a series of taps so that we get a little bit of texture, because this light is on bark. There we are. Maybe we get a little bit more, and we work that up here. Now we'll take a break from our trees, proceed downwards, and continue working with this gorgeous light that we have in the background. For that, we want our titanium white, a little bit of our Naples yellow. We'll do a test, make sure that we have the same pigment, if not something just a little bit darker. We'll take this, and we'll just run it over our ice in the distance. Then we'll have it move forward. We can let it run out as we progressively move towards the front. You can see them softly moving over the shadow, that way the shadow adopts the warmth, but it doesn't lose the fact that it is a shadow in that depth that we established. Then we can connect that to a little bit of the highlight up here. Have it work around some of the slopes. Now, because it is acrylic, we do need to thicken it at the very top. Doing a soft blend also up here, just so it has a bit of a diffused look. Typically we'd use the filbert brush for a blend like this, a wet and a dry. But I'm sticking with this one just because I want that very sharp application. One more application, just thickening it here. Now as we move forward, we're going to take this, we're going to look for all the highlighted areas, the areas that are risen just a little bit, and we can tap on just these beautiful little warm bits of highlight sporadically throughout. And this is just the pieces of ice that are raised and they're catching that gorgeous warm glowing hue in the background, just painting the reflection of that light. And also apply it over some of our snow again, just sharpen that to a degree. Our markings are going to be a little bit bigger back here, simply because we won't see that amount of detail from the distance. But we do still want that light. So here we are, a little bit farther down, so we can see the details in the more prominent section a bit better. These highlights are really going to stick out as we start to slightly veer from the center of our brighter spots. We don't want to do too much in that area because we can do pooling water if we want to. Want to keep these sharp You can see we're creating these lines that were previously there, but they were much more subtle. And this is where the ice really starts to shine. We just continue to build it up. There we go. You can see how it's almost all the way across with texture, but to varying degrees. And then it dissipates as we move up. It's going to do a lot of pooling water, but I don't know that I really want to at this point. I really like what we're establishing with the ice. And I don't want to overdo it or take away from the texture. One of those things where you really need to step back, give it a good look, maybe do a little trial, see if we like it. Shouldn't be afraid of trying these things. You can always paint over it. I really love this piece because I feel like it evolved a lot as I painted it. It really came into its own, and I think it'll continue to do so. Through measured wrists. As you were really bouncing around a lot. As my paint starts to lessen, I can go into the darker spots because the marking I make is significantly less dark. So it looks like a natural indent in those not so bright spots. Okay, so from a distance, really liking it, but I came to a conclusion, which I think is quite fun. We switched from a running water to ice. And what is ice? Ice is reflective. So we now have the opportunity to paint the reflections of some of these trees a little bit, just so they get lost down there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of my Naples yellow, titanium white, cadmium red, not much cadmium red, but a little bit, hint of Mars black, and we're going to essentially render a similar pigment, be it a little bit darker, to what we used for the trees back here. And then, it's not quite dark enough. Just darken that again. Take off the extra pigment. I know you are quite far away. It is intentional. Then we can paint in a little bit of these, and it'll get lost as we get farther down. So we only really have the base of the tree, and I paint it mostly in the darker quadrants. Don't expect you to see it well. That's kind of the point. It's very subtle, but I will move you closer as we continue to refine. So here you can see the hints of them. Make it a little bit darker as we proceed forward because these ones are darker than these. Don't want it to be too dark. We can see how it's darkest here and then it dissipates. We can use our finger to do a little bit of a blend, but just soften it. I think I want to soften it a bit more. So let's go with something a bit brighter. Beauty of acrylics, right? Forgiving, we can just walk it backwards. There we go, that's much better. Now let's work on this one. It's darker, Mars black, ultramarine blue, still need that titanium white. We'll do a little test. You can see how it has a bit of a lean. See how I'm dodging portions of our highlighted ice? Just a little bit. Might use my finger to soften it a little bit. This one's fairly straightforward. It'll be a bit more windy, it'll have bends to it. You can also blend with your actual brush, by the way. And then here we start to get the actual branches, I feel like. And you can do a soft blend with your brush by just going over very lightly. But of course it'll get lost in all of this highlight. Just like so. We don't have much here, but we will get the sides of the branches. There we go. Not too much. We're starting by keeping it subtle, which is nice. Go back, do a little bit more here. This isn't something you have to do. The ice might not be this reflective, but it also could be. Personal preference. Okay, so a little bit farther away. I think we just need a bit of that reflection right here. Working with a very watery mixture because I want it to be incredibly subtle. We can build on it if we want to, but we're not forced to. And I'm just essentially creating that transition from the warmer trees in the background to what we have in the foreground down here. Okay, so it's been a couple minutes. I've really been looking at it. I'm very happy at this point. So what we're going to do is not add in the large reflections of water, which I initially thought I was going to do. I think it would conflict too much with the highlights that we have within here. Instead, we're going to re-interject different portions of snow and ice throughout this that I initially had drawn on, but were lost in the multi-layering process. So we'll start with some of our Mars black, ultramarine blue, titanium white. We'll mix up a mid to dark grayish blue, and we need a good amount of it as well. We are using the liner brush, which isn't typically ideal for creating a good amount of paint, but in this scenario, because what we're creating isn't massive, it works well. That said, I would like snow right here, snow, ice, either or. Whatever we are determining this is. And we'll do another smaller one right beside it. It'll just feel much more in place, cohesive, if we have a series of these. And it'll also offer us something a little bit darker within the ice, akin to the reflection, so that they aren't too stark. They're going to progressively get smaller as we work into the background. They are, for the most part, in little clusters, as you can see. There we go. These two will also have shadows, reflections to them. And of course, we're taking our time. You can see that I'm kind of mentally painting them in little areas, like I'll try there, I'll try there. Because I'm not going with the reference photo at this point, I'm just being a bit more cautious. And I do recommend that this process of trial and error, essentially air painting, I feel like that's probably enough for the first batch, the first attempt. So, now titanium white. Mix up a brighter mix using those same pigments. Just like so. Start wrapping that around the tops and the areas that are in the direction of the light. So on the left-hand side, we're painting it on the right-hand side of our little bits of snow, ice. On the right-hand side, we're painting it on the left-hand side of the snow and ice. Always the opposite, right? I feel like we've done that with enough subjects at this point, though, that it's fairly intuitive. Now, yet again, we brighten. Also, towards the end of these lessons, always do like to give a keyword, something that you can use in the comment section to note that you are essentially part of the typically 13% who makes it to the very end. You are part of those dedicated few. It's a little badge of honor, but it's a subtle one, you know? So I and everybody else who gets to the end knows. And I think today's keyword, there we go, is reflection. Because we have so many subtle ones going on through here. That's what we did at the end. I think it's really what makes this piece. So you can incorporate that into a sentence, or you can just use it as an individual word. But it's always fun to see how many people get the word, and also the people who repeatedly get them from lesson to lesson. That's always the best. Also, a big thank you to everybody who's made it this far, who's stuck around through the creation of this piece. I feel like it went through a lot of transformations, but all really good ones. Also, as per usual, big thank you to everybody who supports the channel up over on Patreon. As you know, this channel is predominantly community funded, and we do that through Patreon. And it's because of all of you that I'm able to take the time to make these really long lessons. I think that we all know the painting videos on YouTube that make the real money are the speed paintings, the ones that are like 4 to 10 minutes and they get millions of views, and all of that ad revenue, but I really love doing these longer ones. I really love diving into the painting, really talking about it, having like a meaningful conversation during these, I feel like. Trying to help, attempting to. And again, I'm only able to do that because of the incredible support up there. So big thank you to everybody who makes lessons like this happen possible. And again, for anybody who may be new here, this might be your first lesson with us, you can get the traceable, so a line drawing of it to help you with the drawing process up over on Patreon. You can find things like the reference photo, a picture of all of the different materials, the tubes of paint, the brushes that I'm using. That way it's just very concise and easy to figure out. Don't have to guess if you're using the same brands and the same types of brushes, all of that. Though I am, with these, just using my brush set, which you can also find in the video description. But also, again, on Patreon, we are trying the new video reviews again, where at the higher tier you can send in your artwork and make a little private video reviewing it for you. We'll also have the ebooks up there ready for you if you just want to get some extra traceables or read about the basics of acrylic painting. Really try to make it a great space. Need to incorporate shadows for all of these, so I'm going to go back to the original darker shadow pigment that we used, but I'm going to make it a bit more gray. We'll still use some blue, but not as much. And I'll make it quite watery so that I can blend it back really easily. Just like that. And we're doing it to the opposite side of the light. We'll have it get less and less as we move up here because it should just be brighter in general. There we go. Maybe a little bit of a darker and more blue mix just for this one because it's so close to us. Give it some extra pop and variance. We don't want to do it to these because they are a bit farther away. Make sure that this has that same hue so it's cohesive. And I think I also want to grab some Mars black, a little bit of titanium white, a little bit of ultramarine blue, good amount of water. I want to extend this a bit. Just bridging different portions of the painting through the subject. Just makes it feel more connected. And we can have it getting lost behind this piece of snow so that it adds extra dimension. As little pressure as possible. I think that's really unique. And I think that's the painting. Thank you for being here. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you haven't, subscribe, because it's the unofficial New Year's resolution that I'm going to try to get a video up every single week, at least for the first, we'll say 4 months of the year, and we'll see how that goes. But I'm really excited for the challenge. I have a lot of reference photos and ideas already prepped and ready, and I'm excited. So I hope you are too. I will see you soon with the next painting video. I hope yours goes wonderfully. I hope you feel like you learned a lot. I hope you feel like you're able to relax and just enjoy yourself. But I'll see you soon. And above all, as always, stay creative.